At 2:14 a.m., the digital world above the English Channel simply vanishes. On the bridge of a 150,000-ton LNG carrier, the GPS display flickers, resets, and suddenly places the ship 3 miles inland, right in the middle of a French wheat field. Moments later, the automatic identification system erupts with a collision warning. The screen fills with 500 false targets, vessels that appear from nowhere and seem to move at 460 miles per hour. Then the displays go dark. Through that digital haze, a silhouette appears, one that refuses to show up on civilian radar. The Yaroslav Mudry is moving at 35 miles per hour, its systems overwhelming the frequency spectrum around it. The Strait of Dover is only 21 miles wide. By switching off the digital picture, the Russian frigate has turned one of the busiest sea lanes on Earth into a corridor of uncertainty. But the Russians are not the only ones operating blind. Somewhere inside the chaos, HMS Iron Duke and USS Arleigh Burke are searching for a target that is actively reshaping what every screen says is real. The US Navy is supplying the electronic backbone for a response where every second matters, and one wrong move could change the entire night. The Yaroslav Mudry, a new Strashimi-class frigate, pushes forward, cutting across the bow of a 300,000-ton crude oil tanker. It clears the tanker's bulbous bow by less than 40 yards. The Russian ship is using the sheer size of civilian vessels to mask its own radar profile from coastal defense systems. HMS Iron Duke, a Type 23 frigate, answers with a sudden burst of power. Its Spey gas turbine roars to life, driving the 5,000-ton warship toward 34 miles per hour in seconds. Beside it, USS Arleigh Burke, a guided destroyer, cuts through the rough water. The American ship brings the heavy electronic force, forcing its way through the Russian interference with immense electromagnetic output. While the British frigate focuses on closing the physical gap, the American destroyer works to break through the signal disruption. The two NATO ships move in until they are less than 60 yards from the Russian hull. At this distance, it is no longer strategy on a screen. It is steel, skill, and nerve. On the deck of the Yaroslav Mudry, the AK-630 close-in defense system comes alive. Its barrels rotate and track toward the bridge of USS Arleigh Burke. The American destroyer responds with the first physical warning. The Mark 45 deck system fires once. A 70-pound naval round cuts across the water and lands exactly 500 yards ahead of the Russian frigate's bow. At the same moment, HMS Iron Duke activates a long-range acoustic device. A focused wall of sound reaching 150 decibels slams into the Russian bridge. The windows crack under the pressure and the crew inside is thrown into confusion. The Yaroslav Mudry veers hard. Its steel hull scrapes along HMS Iron Duke with a brutal metallic shriek, the sound of two warships grinding against each other in the dark. And this is where the real pride of the service appears. Anyone who has stood watch on an Arleigh Burke-class destroyer or a Type 23 frigate knows the truth. Technology matters, but only as much as the sailors behind it. When the screens fail, when the signals lie, when every system is fighting confusion, it is the people on board who decide what happens next. So if you served on ships like these, or if you have family out there now holding the line in this kind of unseen contest, share your story in the comments. We want to hear about the moments when the machines went quiet and the sailors took control. A fleet is not just built from steel. It is built from the people who know how to stand steady when everything around them goes dark. And while the frigates are locked in that dangerous close encounter, the Russian tanker Yelnya slips away from the traffic lane. Its course shift points towards something far more valuable than any single ship: the Atlantic backbone, the fiber optic cables carrying nearly $10 trillion in daily financial transactions. The Yelnya slows almost to a stop, holding position directly above the coordinates. Beneath the ship, a concealed hatch opens. Its moon pool slides apart, revealing the dark water below. 5,000 feet overhead, a U.S. Navy P-8A Poseidon Maritime Patrol aircraft circles the area. The aircraft releases a high-altitude anti-submarine sonobuoy pattern, sending 32 acoustic sensors into the sea in a precise grid around the Yelnya. Within seconds, the Poseidon's operators pick up a clean acoustic signature, the quiet electric motors of an underwater drone. It is moving near the cable. Then it locks onto it. The USS Arleigh Burke receives the update through the P-8A's data link and immediately deploys its SQ-Q-89 V-15 sonar suite. But the Yaroslav Mudry sees the sonar arrays entering the water and reacts with clear hostile intent. The Russian frigate cuts across the destroyer's stern at high speed, trying to run its propellers over the NATO sonar lines and slice them apart. The USS Arleigh Burke is forced into an emergency reverse. The vibration tears through the ship so hard that sailors can feel it in their bones. The American destroyer answers by launching a spread of acoustic decoys from its Mark 59 launchers. The decoys hit the water and begin broadcasting the sound profile of a nuclear submarine reactor. Suddenly, Russian sonar operators are overwhelmed by false contacts. While the Russians chase ghosts beneath the surface, the USS Arleigh Burke moves into a blocking position between the Yelnya and the open sea, pinning the tanker close to the British coastline. HMS Iron Duke launches its Wildcat HMA-2 helicopter. At the same time, the USS Arleigh Burke sends its MH-60R Seahawk into the air. The two helicopters hover just 60 feet above the tanker, lowering their dipping sonars toward the open moon pool. The Yaroslav Mudry refuses to let them continue. Its fire control radar activates and locks onto the MH-60R Seahawk. Inside the cockpit, the radar warning receiver shifts from a faint warning tone into one continuous piercing alarm. Every person on board knows what that sound means. The situation has moved to the edge. The USS Arleigh Burke responds instantly. Its Aegis combat system shifts into an automatic defensive mode. On deck, the Mark 41 vertical launch system begins to unlock. Mechanical interlocks disengage. If the Russian ship takes the next step, the American destroyer is ready to answer with an SM-2 interceptor capable of striking targets moving at extreme speed. Then the Russian frigate makes its most dangerous move yet. It drives its engines to emergency flank and points its reinforced bow directly at the middle of the USS Arleigh Burke. 400 yards, 200 yards. On the Russian deck, crews are already at their close-in weapon mounts, preparing for the moment of impact. At the last possible second, HMS Iron Duke fires a non-lethal kinetic deterrent, a high-intensity dazzler laser. A bright green beam floods the Russian bridge, overwhelming the optics and throwing the helm team into confusion. At the same moment, the USS Arleigh Burke fires its bow thrusters. Powerful underwater jets shove the front of the destroyer sideways. The Yaroslav Mudry misses the American hull by less than 15 feet. The near pass throws a wall of water across the deck of the USS Arleigh Burke, soaking the sailors positioned near the 25mm chain guns. The Russian attempt to force the NATO ships back has failed, but the Yelnya is not finished. From its deck, two Project 03160 Raptor-class high-speed patrol boats drop into the water. These are 55-mile-per-hour interceptors built for rapid naval special forces operations and armed with 14.5mm heavy deck weapons. They turn hard toward the Wildcat HMA-2 helicopter, trying to force it to break its hover before it can keep tracking the underwater drone. The USS Arleigh Burke answers by launching its own 7-meter rigid hull inflatable boat, crewed by a U.S. Navy security team. HMS Iron Duke follows with its Pacific 24, carrying Royal Navy boarding specialists. Both NATO boats hit the water fast, racing across the channel at nearly 45 miles per hour. A sea lane normally ruled by slow-moving giants has suddenly turned into a high-speed contest of small craft and split-second decisions. The Russian Raptor boats make the first move. Heavy tracer rounds streak through the darkness, bouncing across the waves like burning stones. One round tears through the inflatable collar of the American RHIB, but the boat's multi-chambered design keeps it stable and moving. The U.S. sailors respond with controlled bursts from their mounted M240B, aiming for the engines rather than the crews. The rounds tear into the outboard housings of the Russian boats, ripping through the mechanical covers and slowing one of them down. One Raptor tries to use its wake to roll the American RHIB. The U.S. coxswain reacts instantly, throwing the boat into a sharp J-turn. The RHIB spins hard through 180 degrees, placing the M240B gunner in the perfect position to sweep the Russian deck and force it away. Above them, the MH-60R Seahawk pilot sees the Raptors closing in and releases a spread of flares. Burning magnesium lights up the entire sector, turning the black water bright as daylight. Under that sudden glare, the Wildcat HMA-2 prepares the decisive move. The helicopter releases a slug, a 500-pound non-explosive acoustic weight, directly into the Yelnya's open moon pool. The heavy mass drops through the water like a stone, guided by the USS Arleigh Burke's laser designator. 60 feet below the surface, it strikes the underwater drone. The impact tears away the drone's robotic arms and crushes its inner pressure structure. The induction sleeve, the core of the tapping system, is reduced to fragments of glass and copper. The Yelnya shudders as the wreckage slams against the internal bulkheads. The Russians now understand the mission has been exposed. Their crew scrambles to pull the damaged equipment back inside. The Yaroslav Mudry moves to cover the retreat. Its AK-63 close-in systems sweep the water around the tanker in a full circle, churning the surface of the English Channel into white foam and flying spray. But the USS Arleigh Burke does not pull away. The American destroyer moves straight into the danger area and brings its phalanx CIWS into surface mode. Its airburst rounds detonate above the Russian deck, striking the Yaroslav Mudry's sensor arrays and breaking apart exposed radar equipment. The Russian frigate answers by releasing a huge cloud of chaff and flares. For the civilian tankers nearby, already struggling with jammed navigation systems, the sky suddenly fills with light, smoke, and false radar returns. Across the channel, captains begin shouting over the radio in multiple languages, desperate to understand whether a local confrontation has just become something much larger. Using the confusion as cover, the Yaroslav Mudry and the Yelnya turn hard toward the Atlantic. Their engines are pushed beyond normal limits, their funnels throwing thick black smoke into the night as they run for open water. The NATO task force follows them to the edge of territorial waters. The warships drive into the swells, bows dropping deep into the waves, crews still at their stations, and systems still tracking every movement. The pursuit stretches on for 20 miles. Now both forces are in the open Atlantic. The sea rises around them with waves climbing to 10 feet. Then the Yaroslav Mudry turns one final time. Its bridge is damaged, its hull is marked from the earlier contact. Its sensors are battered but not silent. And then it locks its anti-ship missiles onto the USS Arleigh Burke. The American destroyer answers by locking its SM-6 missiles onto the Russian frigate. The SM-6 is one of the most flexible weapons in the US Navy's inventory. It can engage aircraft, ballistic threats, or surface vessels with the same terrifying precision. At this distance, less than 10 miles, an SM-6 would reach the Russian frigate in under 15 seconds. For 10 long minutes, the two ships remain locked in a silent standoff. No one moves, no one relaxes. One faulty sensor reading, one false radar return, one automated system reacting too quickly, and the situation could spiral beyond anyone's control. Then the Russians blink first. The Yaroslav Mudry turns its bow south, setting a course toward the Mediterranean. Behind it, the Yelnya follows slowly, its moon pool doors bent, damaged, and leaking oil into the sea. They leave behind a trail of debris, broken equipment, and the remains of the underwater drone resting on the seabed. USS Arleigh Burke and HMS Iron Duke hold their position. The American destroyer's hull is scarred, with paint stripped away where debris and pressure from the Russian maneuver struck its side. But the ship is still there. The British frigate is still there, the line has held, and most importantly, the cables are still intact. As the first light of morning spreads across the channel, GPS signals aboard the merchant ships suddenly return to normal. Screens reset, positions correct themselves. The digital world snaps back into place as if nothing ever happened. To the rest of the world, the day begins like any other. But every sailor on those ships knows the truth. For 4 hours, the English Channel was not just a shipping lane. It was the edge of something much larger. The Russians were not trying to start a wider conflict. They were testing whether the United States and the United Kingdom still had the will to respond when pressure moved from theory into reality. That night, they got their answer. Not through speeches, not through warnings, but through steel nerves, disciplined crews, and ships that refused to move aside. Before you go, there is one detail about the Sea Scepter and the SM-2 that almost nobody talks about. Both systems are frontline interceptors for the United Kingdom and the United States, but they handle the launch phase in completely different ways. On USS Arleigh Burke, the SM-2 uses a hot launch system. When the missile fires from the Mark 41 vertical launch system, its rocket motor ignites inside the launch cell with the intense heat and exhaust vented safely through the deck. But Sea Scepter, used by HMS Iron Duke, works differently. It uses a cold launch system. A high-pressure piston pushes the missile roughly 100 feet into the air before the engine activates. And in a place like the English Channel, that difference matters. A hot launch produces a massive heat signature that can briefly interfere with a ship's own sensors during the most critical seconds of an engagement. In a crowded sea lane, those seconds matter. You cannot afford to lose track of another incoming threat, a nearby vessel, or a sudden change in the battle space. With a cold launch, the British ship can fire while keeping a cleaner radar picture from the very beginning. The missile leaves the ship first, then lights its engine away from the deck. That means the US and the UK brought two different defensive philosophies into the same fight. One system delivers raw power through the vertical launch cells of a destroyer. The other gives the frigate a cleaner view of the field during the first seconds of action. Together, they close the gaps. Whether the threat came from above the water, below it, or across the surface, there was no easy opening. So the next time you see a routine patrol on the news, remember this. Every sensor, every launcher, every aircraft, and every sailor on that deck is part of a system built for the moment no one wants to see, but everyone has to be ready for. Disclaimer: this video is a dramatized scenario inspired by real-world naval capabilities, public information, and current geopolitical tensions. It is not a factual report of a real engagement. Some elements are hypothetical and created for storytelling purposes. Events, dialogue, tactical decisions, and character reactions are fictionalized to help viewers better understand how such a situation could unfold.